And do we indeed have Councillor Hildebrand?
Yes, he's
Oh.
on the phone. He's the phone. He doesn't have picture, but you see that little phone? That's him.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. It is 5:30, and I can confirm that we are streaming and recording. You may begin your meeting.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Madam Madam Clerk. I see that we do indeed have quorum, so I call this meeting to session. Special council meeting on the August 30th at 5:30 p.m. As usual, before we continue any further with the meeting, the land recognition statement shall be read, and this week it is my turn. We begin this meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. We turn to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I have received an amendment to the agenda from Councillor Hildebrandt. The amendment is that the agenda be amended to move items 4.1.1 and 4.1.2 after item 4.1.6. To you, Mr. Mayor, I am looking for a seconder.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for this motion? Not seen one. Madam Clerk?
As there is no seconder, the motion would die. Therefore, we would go back to the original main motion, which is be it resolved that the agenda for the August 30th, 2022 special meeting of council be adopted as circulated. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, discussion on the agenda ordered as outlined by the clerk. Any discussion on this? Not seen any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. And this motion is put forth by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Wink. And the vote begins with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That does bring you to the disclosure of pecuniary interest.
Okay, thank you. After viewing the agenda, is there any councillor who has a pecuniary interest or general nature thereof to declare? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have so noted. You're on your first item of business for tonight, and I have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2022-0201, Recommendation Draft Report for Draft Plan of Subdivision and Zoning Bylaw Amendment, Tanner Extension for information as it pertains to file numbers 26T1903-2021 and AM12-2021, and that Council direct planning staff to prepare the bylaw for approval for the zoning bylaw amendment for Council's consideration, and that Council approve the draft plan of subdivision as attached as Appendix A, subject to the conditions in Appendix B. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion by members of council on this item? And Councillor Hildebrand, of course, I can't see you, so don't be shy and shout out if you desire to speak, please. Thank you.
I desire to speak up, yeah, for all, more.
Madam Clerk?
Sorry, was there any comments there, Councillor Hildebrandt?
Yes, I would like to speak. There must be some interference happening on the phone on me. Yes.
Certainly, I think the mayor has given you the floor.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. The concern I have raised is with regards to item B, item 4.3, where the clause allows for cash allowance in lieu of parkland. Over the last 20 years, the residents like the complete open space behind their home, like a park that they own. If the town accepts cash in lieu, this creates an issue because no significant parkland is shown on the sign that they have in their subdivision, although the information we have in front of us shows a potential further parkland. Possibly the director of planning could address this for me.
Yes, to Barb Weens, Director of Planning, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So this is Tanner Extension is a plan of subdivision in the Lot 177 secondary plan area. And there will be a future park in this area. And through this subdivision, we are going to be receiving a parcel of land. It's block 14 on the plan of subdivision. That will be dedicated to the town for parks purposes. So this is the beginning of acquiring the land for park. When the adjacent lands to this subdivision also develop, there will be additional lands that we will get for park purposes in this neighborhood. So the long-term plan is to certainly provide for a park in this neighborhood. And this, through the approval of this subdivision, we will start with acquiring some of that land for a park. So this is the first step. And so yes, we are, again, through this subdivision, we'll be receiving block 14 for park purposes.
Councillor?
So the town will not be accepting cash in lieu. That lot will still be parked.
Ms. Weens?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, we are receiving block 14 for park purposes. If block 14 is less than the 5%, then what happens is, if, for argument's sake, if it's 3% of the land area, then we would obtain 2% of the value of the land for as cash in lieu. And when we get the final plan, will make that calculation in terms of that, because that will be the precise measurement in terms of the final M plan that's prepared by the surveyor. So in this case, we will be getting land, but there might be additional or some small component of cash in lieu as well, but it will be just a small component if there is cash in lieu. The primary component is receiving land.
Councillor?
Correct. So in summary, we are getting a piece of land, and the future plan is to have that large parcel of land attaching to it, create parkland for these residents.
Mr. Mayor, through you, that is correct.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The vote begins with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Your next item on the agenda, we do have a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrandt, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2022-197, recommendation for applications for draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment, Park Place West, for information, and that Council direct planning staff to prepare the bylaw for approval for the zoning bylaw amendment for Council's consideration, and that Council approves the draft plan of subdivision attached as Appendix A, subject to the conditions in Appendix B. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any council discussion on this item? Not seeing any. Councillor Hildebrandt, any comments?
No comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you. This vote begins with Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Mr. Mayor, I have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2022-0200 Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw and Official Plan Amendment Number 15, Final Recommendations, and that Council approve in principle Town of Pelham Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 4481-2022, and that Council approve in principle Bylaw 4482-2022 Official Plan Amendment Number 15, and that Council waive Section 34 bracket 10.0.0.1 bracket of the Planning Act, which prohibits applications for zoning bylaw amendments and minor variance applications for a 2-year period after the comprehensive zoning bylaws passed for all lands zoned residential development RD in comprehensive zoning bylaw 4481-2022. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Thank you. Any discussion from any council members on this item? Councillor Wink.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director. The last paragraph about prohibition of zoning bylaw amendments with the exception of RD Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 4481-2022. Why is the amendment for the 2-year period just to the RD zoning as opposed to all zoning throughout the town?
Ms. Weens?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So the Planning Act has a requirement that says that there shouldn't be any amendments to new zoning bylaws when they're adopted for a period of 2 years unless there is a resolution by council to permit those. So in this case, we had included in the residential that that exemption on waiving the 2-year requirement would apply to the residential development zones only. Those are the zones that we zoned lands in the East Fonthill and East Fenwick area where we don't have a particular development application. And so we know that we will, within the next 2 years, we will be getting development applications on those lands. So we felt it would be appropriate that we would allow zoning amendments on those lands. So that's the reason or the rationale why staff had recommended allowing that exemption on the 2-year rule to the residential development zones. I understand that some members of council feel that that exemption should apply to all the zones in the zoning bylaw, and certainly staff don't object to that. It is a provision in the Planning Act that says you could restrict or limit zoning bylaw amendments and minor variances for a period of 2 years unless there is a resolution. So if it is council's desire to change that and make it all zones, that is not, the staff don't have any issue with that. We can agree to that. It just would mean a change to that resolution.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, back to the director. So what's the positive and negatives of extending it through the entire town?
Ms. Weens?
So, sorry, Mr. Mayor, yes, thank you, through you. By allowing the exemption of the 2-year rule on all zones, it would mean that if, for example, there is somebody who wants to do something with their property and it doesn't necessarily comply with the zoning, they would be able to come forward with either a zoning amendment or a minor variance application. And so they could proceed right away instead of waiting for the 2 years. The reason why the 2 years was put in place by the provincial government was to at least afford the opportunity for the new zoning bylaw to, establish some traction in the community, if I could use that word, or, provide for at least its existence for a period of time before there are requests for changes to it. We can't predict when somebody will be coming in with an application for a zoning bylaw amendment and or a minor variance. So if you don't exempt all zones and there is, someone that does come forward to you, then they will be coming forward on an individual basis requesting council pass a motion to allow them to either apply for a variance or a zoning bylaw amendment. And by making it all encompassing to all zones, that will minimize or reduce the number of times that may come forward to council in this 2-year period.
Councillor Wink?
Yeah, so someone who may be looking for something for an amendment or a variance that just hasn't got the application to you. Like, we've had this zoning bylaw for 36 years, and people through that 36 years have been able to make application, and now all of a sudden, if we approve this, they've got to wait 2 years. In all honesty, I don't effectively it's kind of shutting out the committee of adjustment for 2 years because you won't be getting any applications. So I don't particularly have a problem with applying this to all zones and eliminating the 2-year waiting period. I'm not sure what other councillors think.
Well, let's put it out there. I don't see Councillor Olson with a hand up. Before I go to the other two, then I would tend to agree with Councillor Wink that in order to get this passed and have everybody more or less on the same footing, I would have no problem myself with passing a resolution to extend to all zoning areas of the town. I look now at Councillor Olson or Councillor Hildebrand. I see Councillor Olson, a comment?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a good idea to be as open as possible about these things. So I would be happy to have no restrictions.
Thank you. Councillor Hildebrand, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. This, to me, is a living document. I want to ensure that this resolution is made to allow all zones to make changes, not to have a 2-year moratorium. I'd also like to say some things a zoning bylaw cannot regulate, like tree removal, including engineering standards, which the town has, national building codes and Ontario building codes, which include the green standards. Now let me share major improvements this zoning bylaw has. It establishes urban boundaries, protects wetlands and woodlands. Wetlands going into protected zones, which does not allow for development. Currently, this is not in our zoning bylaw. It has buffers around significant areas and features. It has heritage protection with 3 zones added. It has an environmental protection zone. Does not permit development there. It has EV2, allowing some ag uses in these zones. Conservation zones and protection of greenbelt natural heritage zones, so people know where they are, and it's recognized. Features, linkages between features and systems approach. It establishes small business opportunities in communities and forms farm properties, allowing for people to live where they work. I'm in full agreement of this zoning bylaw with the resolution that all zones can make applications with no 2-year moratorium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor, for those comments. I need now then a councillor to put forward the resolution, Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, so I have an amendment prepared that the motion be amended to strike for all land zoned residential development, RD, from the last paragraph and insert for all lands zoned. So we would be looking for a mover and a seconder.
Okay, thank you. And I see Councillor Olson can be the mover. Councillor Wink, you will be please seconder. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now on the floor for discussion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We've already semi-discussed, but any councillor have any further comments they'd like to make on the motion? I don't see any. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you. The vote begins with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does now bring you to the main motion as amended. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. On the main motion as amended, any further discussion? Not seeing any. Councillor Hildebrand, any comments?
Thank you. No, thank you. No comments.
Okay, thank you, sir. Back to the clerk, please.
Thank you. I will use Councillor Olson and Councillor Wink as the mover and seconder on this as well. And the vote again begins with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Your next item of business is a motion put forth by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2022-0172, Emergency Management Program 2022 revised for information, and that the proposed Town of Pelham Emergency Plan as outlined in Appendix A be approved, and that the clerk be directed to present the necessary bylaw at the next regular meeting of Council on September 6, 2022. To you, Mr. Mayor, that may end up being on the 19th.
Thank you. Any discussion on this item?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we approve this now and it comes to the next meeting, do the other councillors who aren't able to be here tonight have a chance to address this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if Council approves the motion as it is, the bylaw will be on the next upcoming meeting, and whomever is attending that meeting would have the ability to comment on the bylaw during the presentation and consideration of bylaw section of the agenda.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? I've not seen any. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you. The the vote begins with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2022-0191, Update on In-Ground Waste Collection Service Provider for Information, and that Council endorse the recommendation from town staff to contract with Niagara Region for in-ground waste collection services and include the expenditure in the 2023 operating budget for Council's consideration. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Thank you. Any discussion? And I see Councillor Olson with his hand up.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Cook. I noticed a comment in the narrative that there was an issue of mixing the trash and mixing the recyclables. Was that resolved?
Mr. Cook?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, not really. In speaking with a number of Ontario Parks Association, contemporaries, this kind of problem happens everywhere. Especially in the public realm. Most people are really good at sorting their own garbage and trash and recycling for their home pickup. Not exactly so much in public areas. And we simply don't have the staff to be sorting garbage. So, I mean, the problem does exist.
Councillor Olson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, so I guess then once again, it's a situation where we have to educate people or use signage to direct them to not to sort their own trash. So am I to take this to mean that the recyclables are going into the landfill? That's where this is happening?
Mr. Cook?
Really haven't confirmed where Cotton is delivering this, delivering our material. We assume that that's what's happening, but even if the region does pick this stuff up, if they do find that the recycling is contaminated, generally speaking, yes, it is sent to landfill.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Olson. Any other councillor have a comment to make?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have lots of comments.
Yes, Councillor Hildebrand, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. As council probably knows, I'm the representative with regards to waste at the region at CLC 12. We dealt with this issue just over 2 years ago. But let me update you because I've talked to both our contractor that we use. But let me go back even one more step. All the sites, whether it's the recycling center or the landfill sites that the region uses, there is a supervisor from the region there, and the rest of the landfill and recycling center is run by private enterprise. So those individuals are there all to make money. I just received from the region, because I've been talking to them constantly about their program, and the ruling is if there's contamination level of more than 2% by volume, but the material is too compacted to be properly sorted, it's impossible to observe contamination, and that's when the penalty clause occurs. So that's the dilemma the contractor that we're using now faces. Let me just be clear. The only issue we're talking about, we're not talking about the cardboard type products. That is recycled out. The issue we're dealing with here is the blue box. And talking to the Niagara region person who's in charge, she doesn't really sign who she is. Maybe the mayor knows. Anyway, the email I had from her, I asked her how many other municipalities use their contractor. In our case, it was the GLF. And they said only one other municipality used the regional services. And I asked why she thought that was. She said, I have no idea. Well, I told her I can tell you why it is. I said the local contractor that the other municipality use is based on price. And our contractor, which is a local contractor, delivers excellent service, and his price is almost half of what the region requests us to pay. Plus, the penalty is the same for everyone. Talking to our contractor, if his pickup of the material is clean, he has no problem delivering it to the landfill. But he's saying that even if there's a cup or something in it, then he's subject to the penalty clause the region imposes. Now, talking to this regional director again, she tells me that they've unofficially allowed up to 50% contamination. But nowhere does she put that in her paper, and nowhere has she corresponded that message to anyone that I can find. The mayor is on the Public Works Committee, and I'll let him comment what he's heard. I've talked to my director, who's in charge of CLC 12, and from the region, and he knew nothing about it either. So it seems to be one of those unwritten whatever type of rules the region has somewhere, but they're not willing to publish it, because if they would allow 50% contamination, I'm sure you get a lot of different people delivering them there. Now, the good news or the bad news on the whole situation is this. There is a big transition happening in January 2024. The Blue Box program is just transitioning from being the responsibility of the municipality, and the responsibility becomes the responsibility of the manufacturer. This applies to all public spaces, parks, trails, and everything like that. However, it still leaves the municipality with responsibility for large container pickup, like the Moloch system that we have. So the Moloch system is a special issue. But the region is trying to work their way through some policies, and I'm going to ask the mayor to see whether he can enlighten us better as to where the region is with the Blue Box transition program, because obviously that's the area we have problems with, and I'm sure the region's got the same problem. Talking to this director at the region, I was asking him, okay, what are you doing at your parks? The surprising answer I got is, we've got exactly the same situation you have. This director, I suspect, lives in our area because she said she's been to our festivals, plus her son plays out of the Meridian Center. So she knows exactly what we're doing and what we're looking at. So I invited her to meet me sometime when her son's playing hockey in town, and we'll have a further discussion. So I will not be supporting the motion, because whether we go with the region contractor or our own private contractor who's doing a great job, he's far more economical. Plus, we got a big change coming in 2024. So I would recommend not approving the motion as written and sticking with the present contractor. Thank you.
Thank you for that, for those comments, Councilor Hildebrand. You're exactly right. The come 2024, the producers of the containers on all other areas do indeed become responsible for their disposal. It seems I find it pretty quite a program to be initiating. The good thing is that 2024, when the region will be joining this, I believe we're either the last or the second to last region to be doing this. So by the time that the region is ready to transition to this program, there will be at least 3 or 4 other regions in the province that will we can use their mode of operation as a guidance and to how we move ahead with this. So it is interesting, as you noted, that there's only either 1 or 2, I forget the number, municipalities that are with the region, and I can't remember if you stated the difference, Councillor, in the per ton charge. Did you state that, or do you? It is quite a substantial amount, is it not, Councillor Hildebrand?
It's almost twice. Yes, it's almost twice as much.
Yes. Well, yes.
It's a considerable difference.
Thank you. So that's interesting, and thank you for that information. Any other councillor wish to also comment on this? No. Go ahead, Councillor Hildebrand.
What I'm trying to do with the region, and so far I've not been successful. I think our landfill site at CLC 12, which services Pelham, West Lincoln, and Grimsby, is the most efficient and has the greatest diversion project or percentage of the complete region. They do not want to publish those numbers for some reason, but I'm convinced we have the only engineered site. There's no other site that's as clean, doesn't smell, doesn't have animals running around. And the site is so good, and we separate stuff so well, that the problem we have is we've had to spend a lot of money on security, because thieves are actually breaking into our waste disposal site with our recycling products and stealing our recycled products that we have segregated in specific areas. And we're constantly having to call the police, because obviously if you look at where Road 12 is, it's up in the escarpment off Road 12 down this road, and it's considerable way off the highway. So the perpetrators have a giant head start on the police before the police arrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hildebrand. I remember before you took on that role, when I was on council, I was the town's representative at the Regional Road 12 site, and I was quite impressed with the regions, how they ran that facility. We were doing top-notch stuff, and because of the recycling programs instituted there, the lifetime of that landfill site has been increased, whether it be 25 or 35 years into the future. So it's amazing what they're doing there. It is kind of hilarious that people are breaking in to steal our garbage, realizing that it is indeed recycled material. Okay, tell you the honest truth, Councillor, you have indeed persuaded my thinking, and perhaps I will be voting against this amendment, and we will stick with our other with the contractor we have now. Madam Clerk, that's what would happen here if we turn down this? Could you explain that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, the report is to receive for information and then to endorse the recommendation from town staff, which is to contract with the Niagara region for the in-ground waste collection services to include the expenditure and include that expenditure in the forecast. I would suggest if council wanted to do perhaps you may want to separate this resolution so that you can at least receive the report for information. That's just by a request, and then you can consider the latter part separately. It is my understanding that if you were to vote down the second paragraph, that yes, we would stick with our current supplier. However, perhaps Mr. Cook may want to speak on that.
Yes. Okay, excellent. Let's turn to staff, a comment on this. Mr. Cook, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to defer this one to the CAO. I don't.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. CAO?
Council, vote as you will. I recommend separating the questions. Simply vote to receive. If you're not in approval of the report as it's currently drafted, either we could hear your commentary or possibly come back with something slightly different and reworked. There are issues beyond the treatment of the recycling within the report. Right, it does go on to discuss other things, and we create a challenge if you throw out the baby with the bathwater. So at this time, if you simply wish to receive the report, it has no either positive or negative repercussions. And the status quo continues on for the time being. And then staff would be free at some point in the future to rework an item and bring it back for your or the next council's consideration, depending on timelines. So we'd have more freedom if you simply receive the report.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. CAO. Any other comments before we call the vote on the receiving of the report?
I'll make a comment, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, go ahead, Councillor Hildebrand.
I think receiving the report for information is a good recommendation, because we know that staff are going to have to make some kind of resolution once 2024 or probably sometime in 2023 with regards to what happens with the Blue Box program, because obviously it's going to change in January 2024, and that might change the report that they're going to issue.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I will now turn to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I have noted that Councillor Hildebrand has requested the motion be divided for separate consideration. I will use the same movers and seconders as stated. The first mover is Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Wink, and the first paragraph is, be it resolved that Council receive report 2022-0191 update on in-ground waste collection service provider for information. To you, Mr. Mayor, if there's any other discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on receiving the report for information? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. The vote begins with Councillor Wink.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That does bring us to the second portion of that motion. And just for clarity, I'll read it back into the record. The second portion is, and that council endorse the recommendation from town staff to contract with Niagara Region for in-ground waste collection services and to include the expenditure in the 2023 capital budget for council's consideration. Again, the mover for this would be Councillor Olson and seconded by Councillor Wink. Is there any discussion, Mr. Mayor?
Any discussion on this item? Again, back to the CAO. So if we vote this down, then it goes back to staff. Is that correct, sir?
So all we're going to try to get you to do is receive the report and not take any other vote.
Okay, excellent.
And that puts the minimum constraints on staff and how we can. I don't know what the future is going to bring either.
Yes.
So it allows the most intellectual freedom in how we explore our future options. And so I would submit I think you've made yourselves fairly clear that you don't want us to take this action at this time. And if you simply receive the report, we won't take this action because we won't have approval or authority to do so.
Excellent. So we just, on the second half, then we just ignore that then, Mr. CAO?
Well, I think once you vote to receive, you just carry on.
Okay, excellent. Yep,
Okay,
thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. I will indicate that council has unanimously decided just to carry on with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. To you, Mr. Mayor, your next item of business is a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrandt, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that council receive report 2022-0202, proposed bylaw to regulate parking at properties owned by the town of Pelham where parking is provided for information, and that council consider adopting bylaw number 4483-2022, being bylaw to regulate the parking of motor vehicles on the town of Pelham property. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. To the CAO, perhaps, before I go to council, I honestly forget the details in that report. By passing this, is this still leaving it open as to what areas that we will be controlling with this bylaw? Mr. CAO?
The purpose of the bylaw is to provide a legal framework, which is to say there's a bylaw attached to the report, and the bylaw creates the capacity for future enforcement action with most specifically at the MCC, which was council's direction to staff. So we've brought back a bylaw that will allow for us to exercise a greater degree of control over town-owned lands. This bylaw only applies to town-owned lands, so not to private parking lots, not to any third-party property, but to town-owned lands within the town. So anywhere we happen to own the land.
Yes.
So it's not actually limited to the MCC, but that was the impetus. And this is the next step in the process, presumably, of sort of urbanization of a component of the town. The area where enforcement is an issue, or where conflict over the use of parking is an issue, is at the MCC. From that, one reasonably infers that most enforcement efforts would occur at the MCC.
Excellent. Thank you. That clarifies what I was concerned about. Excellent. Thank you. I'll open it to members of council. Any other comments on this proposed bylaw? Not seeing any. Councillor Hildebrand?
No comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I'll return to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. This vote begins with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. We're now at the presentation and considerations of bylaws. I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. Be it resolved that Council for the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaws, do now read a first, second, and third time and do pass, and that the Mayor and Clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaws. 1. Bylaw 4481-2022, being a bylaw to regulate the use of land and the character, location, and the use of buildings and structures in the Town of Pelham, the zoning bylaw. 2. Bylaw 4482-2022, being the bylaw to adopt official plan amendment number 15, housekeeping for the Town of Pelham planning area. 3. Bylaw 4483-2022, being a bylaw to regulate the parking of motor vehicles on the Town of Pelham property. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Any councillor have any questions, discussion on any of these three bylaws? I turn to council. Not seeing any. Councillor Hildebrand?
No comment, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you. The vote begins with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Mr. Mayor, that does bring us to motions and notices of motion. We do have a motion listed on the agenda, moved by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Hildebrandt. This is regards with the proper delivery of unsolicited materials, newspapers, and flyers. Councillor Wink, would you like to read your motion into the record?
Yes, thank you. So whereas the Council for the Town of Pelham values building a strong community while protecting the environment, and whereas Council for the Town of Pelham has received resident complaints with respect to the improper delivery of unsolicited materials, newspapers, and flyers, which consequently blow all over town, creating pollution, nuisance, and unsightly mess. And whereas Council for the Town of Pelham deems it desirable to enact a bylaw requiring the proper delivery of any unsolicited materials, including newspapers and junk mail, by reducing the placement of said materials within a mailbox, mail slot, at the door, or in a receptacle designed for this purpose. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Council for the Town of Pelham directed staff to provide a report and draft bylaw for Council's consideration regulating the delivery of unsolicited materials, and that staff shall report back to Council. Should we move that to October, the first meeting in October, Mr. CAO?
I think at this point in time that would be helpful. If we were to do that, what I would suggest is we would still try for September 19th, but I'm not entirely confident we could deliver, but we would try. And
okay, so let's give you a bit of wiggle room then.
always appreciated.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So, Madam Clerk, will you note that
Yes, I have noted the date. It's until October 3rd, as long as there's no objections from any member of council.
Okay. Is there any member of council objecting to the moving of dates back somewhat? Don't see any. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. To you, Mr. Mayor, then for discussion.
Okay. For discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Councillor Wink.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for the information of the rest of council, the mayor and I met with a couple of staff people from Niagara this week, and we discussed some possible solutions with respect to getting these papers delivered properly, and understanding the concerns that they may have. They just don't have enough carriers, so they hire people to throw the newspapers. And quite frankly, I'm getting quite a few calls about the newspaper deliveries. And just before I went on vacation, I found my newspaper in the middle of Hay Street, and every other newspaper, when I looked down the street, was in the gutters, didn't even hit the driveways. So there is concern. There's the ability of having open dialogue with the newspaper, and I'm sure we can come up with a reasonable solution with respect to this. And in discussion with them, we were more concerned with the urban delivery as opposed to the rural delivery. And I think it's a much bigger issue in town than it is out in the rural areas. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I go to any other council member, I would like to also comment on the meeting that Council Wink and I had with representatives of the paper was Niagara this week, and I was actually quite happy to see that they were they didn't feel threatened by this by the action that we may be taking, and they actually came up with a few solutions that would work, that hopefully will be in the staff report. So yeah, I definitely will be voting for the staff report, and then I would be anxious to see what's brought to council on the date when it returns. Those are my thoughts. Councillor Olson?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I have some reservations about the proposed bylaw. First of all, it is different in Ward 1 because this is one of the main sources of information that the people in Ward 1 have, and I'm not aware of any issues here. Secondly, I'm wondering about the enforcement of such a bylaw, because it sounds to me like we're already in the state where enforcement of all the issues that are coming forward are becoming difficult. We just don't have the staff for this, and I'll be looking forward to a report. I'll vote in favor of the report, but I hope it takes into consideration the people of Ward 1 and the people who rely on the news on the paper, Niagara This Week and The Voice and the rest of them for their information, because not everybody has access to the internet or any kind of things like that. Sometimes they don't even get the mail. If you go into a residence in Pelham, you will find sometimes the paper sitting there from 2 weeks ago, open in the middle of the paper, and people are still reading it. I look forward to the report, but I hope it takes into consideration those types of things. And our press in these days and needs the support of town, and we need to make sure that all the conditions for success for a newspaper and all of our businesses should be taken into consideration. And I look forward to that being in the report. But I would classify them as concerns, nothing that I'd love to vote against bringing a report, but I think they should be in the report and considered.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Councillor. Councillor Hildebrand, any comments?
Yes, I will be removing my name as seconder on this motion. And let me tell you why. I've only received one complaint in the last, I don't know how long, about the nuisance of these papers. I understand what Councillor Wink is saying. However, I've had two residents challenge me on my transparency. They say I'm trying to eliminate media reporting on my activities in council. And I have no intention of ever limiting the media for saying whatever they want about my votes, how I vote, or my comments made in council. So they're challenging me on transparency, and I'm saying I'm totally transparent, so I will not be voting to support this motion. The second comment I got was from one business owner. He said 16 local businesses rely on these papers that are thrown in our driveways for advertising. It affects their employees and the viability of their businesses. They say if we eliminate these papers and cause them issues. That would not be fair to the local businesses or their employees. Therefore, I will not even be supporting a report back, because I don't want to be the one that's limiting local businesses' employment or their effectiveness or any effect on their business. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Councillor. Councillor Olson?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I will second the report, second the request, the motion, because I believe there are legitimate concerns and there are dialogue that must take place. And I respect the fact that Councillor Wink has brought this forward, and I would like to see those legitimate concerns, as raised by Councillor Hildebrand and myself, included in the report.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will so note that. I do see Councillor Wink has something to say.
Oh, Councillor Wink?
So no one's trying to limit freedom of speech, the ability to provide information. No one's trying to try and negate local businesses from advertising. It's a matter of how they deliver. And, you know, in the discussion that we had with them, they understood our position. They would prefer not to have cars driving down the street and chucking the papers in the driveway, but their dilemma is they can't find sufficient carriers to deliver to the doors. But they have provided alternatives on what may work. And those alternatives are doable. We're not trying to put Niagara this week out of business. We're not trying to affect the businesses. I understand the businesses that need to rely on the services of Niagara this week. We're just trying to work with Niagara this week to work on a delivery of the paper that's going to be amicable to all concerned.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wink. And I see Chief Limburner has some comments. Go ahead, please, sir.
Yeah, just kind of through you, Mr. Mayor, just add on to this. So we've been doing this for a number of years. The people having flyers and newspapers and so forth delivered to their homes, especially the plastic bag delivery in the driveway, which contains Niagara this week, Haldeman, Canadian Tire, all those ones. Those are the bulk of the ones, and they come once a week. People get really irritated when they shear their snowblower pin off because it's out in the snow, right? So bylaw is dealt with this a little bit, and the information we get from the delivery companies is if the homeowner makes application to or contacts the delivery company, and request them not to deliver to that address, they will cease that delivery. I know it might not be 100% effective, but it's very difficult for these companies to just, the people that they hire to deliver these things, they just let them fly. They just drive down the street and let them fly everywhere. And I sympathize with Councillor Wink because I've run across that too, where it's just across your front lawn and all over the place. But then there's the other fact that a lot of people like them because it's good advertising and there's a lot of flyers that would get deals. So on a bylaw perspective, the only information I can add to that is that if you don't want something delivered to your house, you can contact the company and they will cease delivering it upon a request.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Chief. Councillor Wink?
Yeah, so just to add onto that, I know I've had complaints from residents that say that they've been calling the delivery people 6 weeks in a row and they're not getting any satisfaction on this. So there's a bit of service level that has to be improved on the delivery, and that's essentially what we're looking for. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other comments on the, on this motion for a staff report? Not seeing or hearing any, I turn to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. So I do have the mover as Councillor Wink, and the new seconder is Councillor Olson. And the vote begins with Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
No.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Mr. Brandt, that brings you to your next item on the agenda, and it's a motion to move in camera. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be it resolved that the next portion of the meeting be closed to the public in order to consider a matter under Section 239(2) of the Municipal Act as follows. B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal employees. D, labor relations or employee negotiations. One item, CAO performance review. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on this item? Not seeing or hearing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This vote begins with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. If council can just give me a moment or two just to end the recording and the streaming. Thank you.
Possibly at this time, we can thank all the staff other than Madam Clerk.